Okay, welcome everybody. It is February 1st, 2023, and you're at the Smart Energy Decisions webinar series. I'm Deborah Channel, Editorial and Research Director of Smart Energy Decisions. This webinar series has been developed to deliver insights and useful information for executives at large electric power users. Today's presentation, brought to us by Atrius, is the 2023 State of Corporate Sustainability. And this is the fourth year that Smart Energy Decisions and Atrius have partnered on this research study. During today's presentation, we're going to review key findings and get some real-world insights into the results thanks to our expert panel. And the topics will include the role of energy management in corporate sustainability goals and the biggest barriers towards achieving your net zero goals. And we're looking forward to this presentation today. But first, as always, some housekeeping. Make sure to enable those pop-ups within your browser and turn on your system's sound so you can hear the presentation. If you need any technical assistance, you can hit F5 on your computer or the Control R to refresh your browser. And if that doesn't work, just click the help link and submit a question and we'll get back to you right away. And speaking of that, if you want to submit a question at any time during the presentation, you can do that in the Q&A box that you'll see in your console. Okay. And on that console, you'll see a media player with today's speakers and slides, and you can make those bigger or smaller, depending on your preference. And there's also a resources box where you can download the slides for today's presentation. And there's also other assets that are provided by Atrius, so you really want to you're going to want to take a look at that. And again, in the corner is that Q&A box. And we will take some time towards the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as we can. And whatever we don't get to, the team will follow up with after. And a little bit about Smart Energy Decisions and our mission. We're really thrilled with the growing participation of the community that we've developed over the years. And we are a very mission-driven company. And what we want to do is help large electric power users improve their profitability and reduce their carbon emissions to meet their net zero and all their other sustainability goals. And these companies are all across the board: commercial, industrial, institutional, and government. And again, we want to help them accelerate their programs and share best practices in energy efficiency and sourcing. And this ongoing webinar series is one of the products and services that we present to meet those goals that we have. Again, in addition to webinars and research, which you'll get a good sample of today, we've got daily news and newsletters. We've got networking. We have our podcast series. We've got custom media, which is white papers and case studies. And we have our live events. Our next live event is going to be here before we know it. It is our Net Zero Forum, which is coming up March 15th to 17th in San Antonio, Texas. And our speakers, we're adding, every day we seem to have new ones, but our keynotes, which we're very excited about, are the City of Atlanta, SSA Marine, and Linear Logistics. We've also got Mohawk Industries, Kirkhill, and a lot of others. And we're going to have a great technology update from Peter Kelly Detweiler. So energy customers and sponsors, your opportunities are a little bit limited at this point. Go to smartenergydecision.com/events for more information. And now let's get started with today's presentation, the State of Corporate Sustainability, and our subtitle, Moving Beyond Energy Optimization on the Journey to Net Zero. And this, I have to say, this research just came out in January. We're only a day after that, so this is pretty fresh, and we're very excited about it. So a quick look at the agenda. We're going to introduce our panelists. We'll give you a quick look at the methodology, and then we're going to dig into the results and get everybody's interpretations. We can tell you what the numbers are. Our panel is going to tell you what they mean in the real world. And then we're going to make them take out their looking glass moving ahead and what are their predictions for the year ahead. And finally, we'll get to those questions and answers from the audience. So first, let me introduce our panel today. We have with us Heath Blount, Principal at Brightwork Sustainability. We have Adam Handler, Director of Corporate Sustainability and Communications at Acuity Brands, and Jane Stewart, Director of Sustainability at Washington and Lee University. So first of all, thank you all for being with us today. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to your insights. No pressure.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay, so a quick note about the methodology. This survey, as in the last, this fourth year, we went out with an electronic survey to energy sustainability and facilities professionals. This was fielded in September and October of 2022. The full report came out in January. Excuse me. And these professionals represent a variety of sectors. We've got commercial, government, higher ed, K through 12, industrial and manufacturing, software and technology, excuse me, as well as suppliers and service providers. So we covered the waterfront on this one, and we're very happy and grateful for their participation. So now let's start looking at those results. What did we ask and what were the answers? And before we do that, we want to ask our audience today to tell us a little bit about themselves. So we have our first poll question. And here's what we want to know. Where do you see your organization on its journey to achieving sustainability goals? So you're going to pick one of these. We are ahead of pace. We're on track. We're behind. We're just getting started. We haven't started yet. We have no goals yet. So take a moment. I'm going to take a sip of water. You're going to answer the survey. And I will say, as we wait for those answers, no matter where you are, you're in the right place today because we've got something for everybody to learn. So let's just give you another moment and get as many responses as we can. And the countdown, 5, 4, you know how this goes. Okay, let's see what our audience has to tell us today. All right, well, almost half, 48% say we are on track. That's great. 11% are the show-offs. They are ahead of pace. About 20% say they are behind. And 16% are just getting started. Very small amount say we have not started or we have no goals. So the reason that we asked you this question is because we also asked this on our survey, and we want to see how your answers compare to what we got from the survey results. So let's take a quick look. All right, so again, on the survey, we asked, where do you see your organization on its journey to achieving the sustainability goals? And I have a feeling a lot of people that took this survey are on the call today because these answers are really close. 12% of the survey respondents said they're ahead of pace compared to 11 that we just saw on the call. A complete match on those who are on track, 48%. A little bit more behind on the survey, 19% compared to 10% with us today. And among those just getting started, 28% on the survey compared to 16% who are with us today. And finally, about the same, no goals or haven't started, about 2%. So good to know that everybody's kind of aligned on this. But let's see what, Heath, I want to start with you. Does this reflect what you're seeing in the real world and what you see with your clients? Is this where they tend to be? Heath, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you. Welcome.
I would say this does definitely match up with what we see. We try to come and meet clients where they are in their journey through sustainability. And we do see, folks that are just getting started really don't have an understanding of what type of goals or targets mean for them. We have folks that are on track or ahead of pace and really trying to raise the bar in their next plan or their next strategy within their sustainability program. So I would say that this is fairly representative.
Okay, thanks. And Jane, let's bring you in. What do you think of these?
Yeah, this is definitely, this resonates with how I'm feeling in higher ed and what I see with my colleagues. And I think that it makes sense in terms of the timeline for how long this has been really a mainstream topic in higher ed. Probably our two primary organizations that help support and inform and produce reports for higher ed in this area, which I'm talking about ASHE and Second Nature, really came on the scene in full force kind of early 2000s, 2005, 2007. So it makes sense to me at this point, we're a little more than a decade out from that. Institutions have had a chance to assimilate information, develop goals, get started. It feels natural that at this point we've found our footing and we have a sense of what we'd like to be doing and a sense that we've got some way forward in executing, but we're not ahead of the curve yet. And I'd add that I actually find these numbers really hopeful. I feel like this is exactly where you would want to see the numbers shake out in terms of anticipating real progress being made, because obviously we don't want to be behind the curve, but if there were too many people saying they were ahead of the curve, I might be tempted to suspect that maybe they didn't yet know all of the challenges ahead of them, or maybe they weren't looking at their information quite as critically as they should. So I feel like this is great. This is a great spot. And I'll also note that I think it's probably one where we're going to see a fair amount of movement, because what I've seen in my time in the work that I do is as soon as you feel like you're in a great place, you've got a handle on it, that means that you've got a handle on it. So you're ready to understand the next wave of challenges. And then you start to feel like you're behind. So it is a cycle, but this feels right. And I think it feels good.
Okay. Actually, I want to add a little bit to that, because we're seeing, the participation that we're seeing in our website or events or, all the media that we do from higher ed has just grown exponentially over the past, I'd say 5 years. So it kind of tracks with the timeline that you're saying and the participation in this survey. So they're really out there, they're doing good work, and they're moving the ball forward. So that's great to see. Okay, and Adam, anything to add?
Yeah, I would echo that it's really hopeful that almost everyone is on the journey somewhere, right? Even if they're at the beginning of the journey, almost everyone's moving, and that's really exciting. I think this question's fun because how I would answer it depends on what email I just got or what just happened in my own organization, and I kind of waffle between we're on track and we're behind. We've set a set of targets and we are executing against them, and so technically we're on track. But I also know, and I hear from many of our ESG ratings organizations and other external and internal stakeholders that we could be doing more and should be doing more and need to do more. So I vacillate, and I suspect and I hope that many ESG managers, sustainability folks are moving their organizations as far and as fast as those organizations can handle, but also have their eye on what's coming next.
It's funny, in our news coverage, I see a lot. We've met a goal, we're restating a goal. It's like as soon as you meet a goal or come close to it, there's always another one right behind it. Or, the feeling that, yes, we can do better. That's one of the great things about what I see in the industry. Okay. Did I interrupt somebody? Was somebody coming in there?
No, but I think it would be interesting, future surveys to have a, secondary question for this. How well do we think we're doing? Not just are we on track, but how challenging is staying on track? Qualitatively would be interesting as well.
Did we set good enough goals?
Right.
Like maybe we're on track because we weren't aspirational enough. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. All right. There's always another question to ask on surveys. Okay. I'm moving along to the next question. Speaking of that. So now we want to talk about some of the issues that companies are facing. What are the barriers to successfully implementing their sustainability strategy? And data quality issues, number one, by a pretty wide margin. 41% of respondents were saying data quality problems, gaps, incorrect readings, so on and so forth. Further behind, actually in second place, difficulty reporting on emissions targets across the value chain at 28%, followed by difficulty making the business case for reporting and data management solutions. And then a little bit further down, challenges managing data. Data issues are, in one way or another, touching on each of these barriers. So there are a lot of problems out there, people that are grappling with them in order to get everything in order and meet these goals. So Jane, let me go back to you on this one first. And what are your thoughts?
Well, I had two initial thoughts. And the first was that biggest number that I think it's 41% about data quality issues. I feel like, isn't that really sort of at the heart of almost all of the other issues that are listed? If you don't have good quality data, it feeds all of those other things. You're not going to be able to report on your emissions if you don't have that base data in the first place. You need a certain amount of decent data even to make the case for why data is valuable and why you need resources to be able to collect more data. So I think that data quality piece that so many people responded to, the reason that that captured 41% is probably because that's at the foundation of everything else that you need. Mm-hmm. And I also, it struck me, and I may be putting too fine a point on this, but in that sort of subtitle question about data and its necessity for helping implement your strategies, it sort of sets up data as separate from the strategy, whereas I think it's useful to include data collection as a fundamental piece of your strategy. And I think about some of the things that we've done at our university when we started to think about Scope 3 emissions and transportation in our climate action plan. When we set up our outline for strategies, it included as the first step getting really good quality data on our travel, because that is the first piece of the strategy, is understanding what we're dealing with. Without that, it's really hard to move forward in any of these other areas.
Yeah, that is a good point, for sure. And Heath, let's turn over to you.
I echo that sentiment. I really think you can't measure what you're not monitoring or metering, and so that's really important to have that data to help you make decisions. I think the other thing on this question and answer that sort of strikes me is the difficulty reporting on emission targets across the value chain. And I think to some extent that has to do with the quality of the data, but it probably also implies some stakeholder engagement that needs to be done within the organization, so that folks throughout the organization understand what's trying to be accomplished. They know what's asked of them, and they know whether or not the information that they're sharing is is focusing on that solution. I think there's a piece to that as well beyond just the actual hard data. There's an institutional piece as well.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, getting that alignment and that understanding is very important. Okay, and Adam?
Yeah, I would say that every one of these responses resonates with me or resonated. And now it's time for the shameless plug part of my comments. Acuity Brands is one of, how do I say that? Atrius is a product within Acuity Brands. And last year, we started using the new functionality of Atrius Building Insights to capture and calculate our Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And I migrated from challenges managing data in spreadsheets up to any of the other admitted existing challenges. All data is always going to be hard. Getting data out of stakeholders and the supply chain is always going to be hard. There's always data quality problems. But we moved off of spreadsheets, and it's made my life immeasurably easier. I'm speaking to you, 14%.
All right, thank you for that. And we're going to move on to our next slide and our next question. And this is actually a two-parter. So first, which of the following best describes where your organization is in managing and reporting on your sustainability initiatives? So again, a little self-analysis here. So again, 15% say they're ahead of the crowd, and that includes measures like fault detection and diagnostics. Another 17% say we're well on our way. For example, we're sub-metering data for better building performance, for better visibility to building performance. Again, a hopeful sign, 23% picking up speed. As an example, they're accessing real-time data to identify anomalies in performance. And close to that, 24% are taking those first steps. They're automating the data that they're using into a centralized system. And 21% are interested, but they're just at the beginning. They're putting the manual data into a spreadsheet. So again, what Adam is getting away from, they're just starting. So that's good. And then the second part of this, before I go back to our panel, is which of the following factors are important to the success of the sustainability program? So what do you need to hit those goals and be a success? And the number one answer on this, and this one was a multiple choice, 75% resources and funding to support the sustainability initiatives. That's key for 3/4 of the respondents, which wasn't much of a surprise, I think. Utility incentives to offset costs. It does always come back to funding at some point. So a little over half are looking for those incentives. 49% say organizing data streams into a centralized location. Again, coming back to data, we've got to get it into an organized system so that we can act on it. 42% say external engagement and visibility of programs and results, while 37% say automating the process of reporting on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Only 3% said none of the above. I'd like to know what they're thinking. But Jane, why don't we go to you? What are your thoughts on these two, on these factors for success?
Well, I think you mentioned at the beginning, Deborah, that you're seeing more higher ed participation in these kinds of webinars. And I think that definitely reflects, for a long time, for obvious reasons, a lot of the sustainability work in higher ed was around the educational mission. So what was happening in the classroom and research. And we have seen, I think, a real, not a shift, because that academic side is still obviously essential, but more attention being paid on the operations side. So there is more going on the data collection, on automation and dashboards and all of that. I will note that I think it's important to remember the distinction between having tools and data and having the capacity to use them well. And I think that's a challenge in smaller organizations and small schools like mine, that it's wonderful to have a tremendous amount of data at your fingertips, but you really also need to have the time to analyze it and to decide what to do with it. And if you can't act on it, if you can't use the information that you're collecting to impact change, it's not doing you a whole lot of good. So I'll be interested to see how these survey questions change over the next couple of years. And if we see any reflection of more people coming to this automation market and collecting a lot of information, but then finding that they're kind of hitting a wall in terms of making it meaningful.
Right. Again, actionable data is something that we come back to, the idea of that.
And that will lead into resources as well, because that's part of that question, is in order to spend the time analyzing the data and finding ways to use it to move toward your goals, you need people, you need programs. And so that sort of leads into the sort of other half of that slide.
Right. And you need the people to know how to use the programs, to your point.
Right. It's
not enough to just, okay, look at this new shiny toy we have. Now, how do we use it, and how do we take action?
Right.
Okay. Right. Okay. That is a good point. And Adam, actually, I'm going to go to you on this.
Good. I was trying to raise my hand over here. Jane, I think, made a really important point that is, and keep me honest here if I'm wrong. I think that most organizations have incredibly small sustainability functions. At Acuity Brands, it's just me full-time thinking about this stuff. And so resources and funding, yes, I would love additional headcount, but one thing that's incredibly helpful to me is not spending my time gathering the data. So yes, Jane, you're absolutely right. You need to have the time and the people to analyze that data, reach conclusions, and then go do a thing about it. But if I'm giving up half of my time gathering the data, I never get to the other stuff. So that's critically important. And I see it in resources and funding. I see it in organizing data streams, and I see it in automating the process. Those are all things that tech can do, and let us focus on the other stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I think one of the things we experience with our clients is they are very often individuals within a large organization that have these responsibilities. They don't have substantially a team with them. Sometimes, one of the things they really appreciate about working with us as an organization that's focused solely on sustainability is we have a huge team, 70 people that, can be their extended team in a lot of ways. So I think they value that. I also think, the engagement and bringing in others within the organization to be involved in these efforts, to communicate out about what they're doing, what their successes are, and using the data in a way to sort of align with our goals, and their targets is a really important piece to make sure that, we're not just looking at the data for data's sake and reporting the data, but what does the data mean? What does that indicate about our material impacts? Where do we have to focus and target, and how best to, align the sustainability goal with, others within the organization that may want to participate, even if they're not tasked as sustainability team members.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Using the data to tell the story, both within your company and outside of your company. Yeah. So many people are, everybody is interested in sustainability, and not everybody knows the nuts and bolts of what it means. And if you've got this information and this story to tell, to bring your internal people along, that's a great asset to have, and using it well is a great asset. And also making it a priority within the company where there's so much push and pull for attention, to making sure that sustainability has its rightful place. As you might be preaching to the converted here, but it's important. Okay, and I gave a little spoiler alert about it. It's about the money. It always comes down to money at some point. So let's move on to our next slide, budgeting, everybody's favorite topic. In your opinion, based on the sustainability goals set by your organization, do you have the budget you need to achieve these goals? And in this case, we're giving you a 2-year look, and the look has not changed very much over 2 years. In 2022, 58% said, no, we don't have the budget. This year's report, 55%. So a 3-point change. Not a whole lot of movement there. Heath, why don't we go back to you? What are some of the issues surrounding budgeting, getting the money you need to get these goals accomplished?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would wonder is, are you correctly communicating how the budget relates to the impacts that your sustainability goals and initiatives, the outcomes of those can have? I think that's one thing that is really important in making the business case, is to make sure that you connect those back, not just to the the things that we need to do from a sustainability point of view, but the sort of key drivers of an organization. How best can you align the sustainability story with the rest of the organization's goals and targets? So that's one thing. I think also just generally, I think people are a little cautious coming out of last year, going into this year. There is a lot of sort of conservatism, around the economy in general. Issues related to inflation, energy security. I think also just, the things that we're seeing quite a bit in the tech industry currently in terms of, people being laid off, and job security is definitely something that people are a little worried about, and wanting to be, feel comfortable about how we're setting budgets. I think people are being cautious.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I just wanted you to know, I just wrote down what you said, aligning the sustainability story with the overall company goals. That's so, again, this is a theme that we're seeing that's so important on this. All right, Jane.
Yeah, I would emphasize that as well, Heath, that I think that is huge, is making sure that you're not presenting sustainability initiatives as some kind of sidebar, that you're finding ways to connect them to all of the primary strategic goals of the university, which might be sustainability related, or they might be operations related in terms of cost cutting or streamlining or waste reduction, or all of those things that do have sustainability connections, but actually can have really great cost reduction implications as well. And I think that that's a piece that can be really helpful, is when you're identifying sustainability opportunities that are actually going to save you money. And in terms of reducing energy consumption and reducing consumption in general, things on the purchasing side, those really have real savings implications. And that can be a great thing to emphasize. I think in higher ed, and certainly on my campus, we've moved squarely into the camp of life cycle cost analysis. So something might look more expensive when you're about to buy it, but if you can present the case that it is absolutely going to save you money, whether it's because it's a more water efficient dishwasher or a more efficient air handling system or whatever it may be, you will see the savings in your utility bills often over a fairly short period of time. And if you can just take that step to present that analysis, we have found that people are very receptive to that. And I think that's another piece of it is there's going to be some difference in this budget question if you're talking specifically about a sustainability program budget, or if you're talking about dollars that are spent to move you forward towards your sustainability goals more generally. And I think that's something that I have seen really positive change in over the last few years, is that my office budget might not have increased, but I'm seeing facilities adopt goals and projects, and dining adopt goals and projects that are really crucial to moving us toward our goals, but probably would not be singled out as a sustainability item unless I were pulling them together in a narrative, which I will be.
Interesting. Again, part of how the story gets told. Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
and
over
also
here nodding vociferously. The better job you've done at integrating sustainability into the overall strategy of your organization, whether it's educational or corporate or civic, the harder this question even is to answer. Do I have enough money in my budget? Nope. Are we spending more than we ever have on things that help us get to our sustainability goals? Yes, by a lot.
Interesting point. Right, because it's a cliche, it takes a village, but it does. It's coming from so many different places in the company that sometimes people are not aware that they're contributing to this. And something that Jane said I thought was interesting, the quick wins versus the longer game. Some things are going to get you immediate savings. Sometimes the ROI is harder to quantify in the number of years that, that leadership wants to see it. So that's making that business case becomes very important in those cases. Okay, moving to our next question. I call this one alphabet soup, just a little bit. Reporting standardization. How does your organization report on year-end sustainability progress and goals? So first of all, 57%, more than half, do report, and we'll dig into that in a moment. 27% say that they are not yet reporting on sustainability goals, and 16% don't know. And I think that don't know is very interesting, and that might, again, that's goes back to telling the story within a company and what's actually getting done and who's doing it. But let's dig into a little bit on those that are reporting. This is where the alphabet soup comes in. ESG reports, about a third. CDP, about 10%. Everything else is somewhat smaller. GRI, SASB, GRESB, TCFD, Sustainalytics. There's a lot, and there's more. Under this, there's even more. There's a lot of frameworks out there, and it's still being, who's going to win? Which one is really going to rise to the surface on this? So it's a lot to think about. But Heath, how are you approaching this?
I think this aligns generally with the way that the market is currently focused on these frameworks. I think the past 5 to 10 years, there has been a lot of specialization within the sustainability framework space. I think that there is also a difference within each organization as to what's materially relevant for them, and that helps them understand which frameworks may make sense for them to align with. I see, largest number here are around sustainability reports in general. And oftentimes I'm seeing both in the sustainability report or the ESG report, people presenting the findings and essentially aligning with multiple frameworks, not necessarily just one and reporting solely in that space, but they're using the report as sort of a external facing communication tool while also making sure that it's formatted or aligned specifically to the frameworks that are most relevant to them. I think that's what we're seeing. I also think in very recent months, we are starting to see a bit of a coalescing back into a sort of unified vision for environmental reporting across these frameworks. I think with SASB and ISSB, that change recently has started to bring a lot of these different frameworks to the table to talk about how we can all, be focusing on similar issues and communicating the information so we don't have to have separate manuals on how to understand the information. we can have one sort of set of, common understanding about what is all of this information communicating.
Mm-hmm. For sure on that. Okay, and Jane?
I'm very grateful that in higher ed, there are really two standard reporting structures that almost everybody uses. That's the ASHE STARS report, which is a broad measure of sustainability initiatives that covers environmental sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions elements, but also diversity, equity, inclusion, and governance. And then there's the second nature reporting, which is through the SciMap tool, a fantastic tool for greenhouse gas reporting. That really just covers the emissions categories. And I think in higher ed anyway, it has been so important to have these really concrete, consistent frameworks that we can all compare across. I think it's crucial because when you're just writing your own report for your internal audience, even if you have the best intentions, I think it's human nature that you're going to tell the story that's good. Even if you're really trying to include the whole picture, you are going to talk about what you've been working on, and that's the stuff you're going to have made progress on. And you can get caught up in your own narrative, I think, and lose sight of the areas that you still need to do a lot of work on. And having these external frameworks and an ability to, it's not perfect. Every institution is going to interpret data a little bit differently, and there are questions within the higher ed community about nuances of the way things are reported. But essentially, we are able to have a big picture look at who's doing what. And if somebody is clearly ahead in one category, you can call them up and say, how did you do that? And I think it's key. And I think it's also really helpful in conversations with leadership, because if you as an individual try to make a case that something is important, hopefully you will be listened to and that will be valued. But if you can say, listen, all 2,000 institutions that filled out these two reports are speaking to this question and we don't have anything to say, could we get some data collection on that, or could we get some support for gathering information on this that's going to carry a different weight? So I think having these external reports is fantastic, and I think the more they can be sector relevant, as Heath said, the more effective they're going to be. As I think Heath said, I hope I didn't just mischaracterize you.
I think that was it. All right. And Adam?
Yeah, so if I could sort of consolidate both of those sets of comments, the proliferation of the ESG ratings organizations is super frustrating for someone who's trying to spend much less time doing the reporting and more time doing the bettering. I was really surprised actually that some of these numbers are so small, or some of these percentages are so low, since I spend so much of my time on CDP and SASB and some of these others. I just assume everyone is doing that. But I think Jane made a really important point that, and I think it may be somewhere else earlier in the deck. What can you do to sort of bring along people who are, laggards in your organization? Well, if you're a publicly traded company and Sustainalytics says you're rubbish at one particular thing, it's a really good way to get your CFO focused on fixing that thing.
That is a good point, having that little outside push, saying we're watching and we're not liking what we're seeing. And that kind of leads us into the next slide a little bit. So I'm going to jump in on something here. So how are ESG goals integrated into your organization's business strategy? And, this is something we've touched on. This has been touched on a lot of other questions, but what actually are you doing to integrate this so that it is part of a company's overall strategy? So social impact and community engagement is number one, at a little bit more than half, 53%. Stakeholder engagement, which we've certainly touched on, at 45%. Financial reporting, which has become very important and very watched, both internally and externally. Supplier management and selection at just under a third. Corporate investments at about a quarter. And then 24% saying ESG goals are not integrated into our strategy. And I'm going to put in parentheses yet. We're hoping that will move, but it's a process for sure. And this one caught my eye, compensation structure, because we're seeing a lot more of this. Your bonus is based on your goal, on meeting your goals, meeting interim goals, meeting final goals. 12% here, I think that number is growing. So that'll be another interesting one to keep an eye on. And Heath, why don't we go to you for this one? What are your thoughts?
We focus primarily on the E in ESG, and I find it interesting that that's not like a key component here. Other than what comes to my mind is the supplier management selection. We are seeing significantly that larger organizations are pushing down some of the ESG reporting because they understand their supply chain is a significant material impact to their operations. We're pushing down some of these requirements around disclosure and transparency of impacts to their supply chain. And that's where we often get involved with some of these smaller organizations as well, helping them understand what their environmental impacts are and, hopefully in the short term, be clear about what they are to the larger organization, and also hopefully longer term, identify where there are challenges and help them improve their performance in that space. So, I think a lot of these things make sense, but it is interesting that, the sort of environmental piece here is not really a big part of the results.
Okay, and Jane, your thoughts?
Yeah, I had a similar reaction to those statistics, Heath. I'll say for us at WNL, we have a few different ways in which we're trying to make sure that we're centralizing these questions. We have a university strategic plan that includes goals in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as environmental sustainability goals. We have a climate action plan that has goals across lots of different categories, so they touch on different pieces of the university operations and communications and governance and all of those things. For us, the way that the stakeholder engagement happens, I think, is interesting, and higher ed will feel a little different from the corporate world in this sense. But for me, it's also where things really get exciting, are the ways that we can marry up what we're doing on the functional and operational side with what's happening in the classroom. For example, as soon as we wrap up here today, I'm heading over to join an accounting class that is working on learning about ESGs and corporate social responsibility. And we're going to be using WNL's process for carbon accounting and our greenhouse gas reporting as a case study for this class. We've got science classes that use we have an energy dashboard actually through Acuity, that we have real-time energy data that our students use that data in lab exercises. We have a student research club that is working right now on developing research to use for our case for fleet transformation. So for us, trying to find ways to bring in our constituents, our students, our faculty, and make these pieces that we're working on not just relevant to, but really useful to the educational enterprise, it helps us in a lot of ways. It helps spread awareness, but it also makes these things that, again, back to that earlier conversation, maybe come out of a sustainability budget or a facilities budget, it makes them useful in the classroom. So then it's part of that academic value proposition as well. So, and I think a lot of institutions of higher ed are trying to proceed in that way so that it all feels like a strategic vision these pieces are working together.
Okay, I absolutely love that. And what I really love about it is not only are you potentially training the sustainability professionals of the future, people that go into finance and other areas, they're also going to have an awareness of this. And to our point about integrating throughout a company, you're training them as well. So that's a terrific program. I really like that. And that's my 2 cents. Okay, and Adam, let's go over to you for this one.
Yeah, I think for Acuity Brands, the company that we are makes answering all of these questions other than not integrated much easier. We're a company that makes LED lighting fixtures, lighting controls, building controls, and of course software that helps gather and present and report not just energy data but also carbon data. So we really have, as a company, positioned ourselves at the intersection of sustainability and technology. The one that I also, like Heath, wanted to zero in on supplier management because I found it super interesting. During the pandemic, we had, like many companies, severe supply chain challenges. I wasn't trying to bother our suppliers or our sourcing folks with let's layer on ESG requirements for our suppliers. Let's just get stuff we can make things with. And it turns out our suppliers were waiting for us to reach out. and then they stopped waiting and they reached out to us. They're doing the right things in many cases. And when they're doing the right things, they want to tell us about it. They see what we're doing. They see that we're at the intersection of sustainability and technology, and they want to get credit for doing the things that they're doing well. They may be forced to do it by some of their other suppliers or their other customers, but they're doing it, and they want us all to know about it.
Deborah, one other thing I wanted that this brought to my mind, the CSR, the corporate social responsibility aspect of ESG is a much more mature space than, more recent environmental standards, carbon neutrality, net zero, those types of concepts, and starting to look at how organizations can meet those goals. That's a relatively immature space right now. So that makes sense to me. What I think it also can, what it also makes me hopeful for is one of the things we are starting to see increasingly is organizations trying to align their efforts under, maybe two potential impact areas. For example, if we can't get to the types of carbon reductions in a supply chain or in their real estate infrastructure, and offsets are a requirement, aligning those offsets with some type of social impact at the same time. Can we target both of those? Can we have double the impact for a single action? I think that's where we're starting to see people think a little bit more outside the box and not just go for the cheap offsets that are on the market. What are the offsets that we can target that have benefit to our community, to parts of our stakeholders within our organization, those types of things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Okay. Anything else on this? Because this actually concludes the research portion, but we're going to move on because we've got this panel here and I want to get everything out of them that we can. So we're going to go off the data and go tap into their experience and their opinions a little bit more as we look at what's coming next. What are their predictions for 2023? And we're going to look at three different areas. I'm going to list them first and then ask each of our panelists to weigh in. So we want predictions on how organizations can continue integrating and elevating their sustainability priorities, and then what do they see the need for greater access to data and eliminating manual processes in 2022? And then where should teams start in building a business case for more resources? These are all areas that we did touch on with the data. I want to know what's going to come next. So Heath, why don't we start with you? Tell us what your predictions are for 2023.
Well, I think under the first item around integrating and elevating their sustainability priorities, one thing that we almost universally see when we connect with clients is they are already doing great things, and they are just not great at communicating what those great things are. That's one of the places where we give them a lot of immediate help, is communicating what successes they are already having. How do those things align with the goals of the organization? For me, I think that's the best place to start. That will build momentum. Those small wins that you were not necessarily aware of can really build that momentum for other wins in the organization.
Mm-hmm. Good point. I like that one. Okay, and Jane, what about you?
I feel like this is the moment where maybe counterintuitively sustainability needs a lowercase s, that we need to sort of lower the profile of the capital S a little bit and sneak our way into everybody else's operations and distribute accountability so that it's no longer about the sustainability professional pushing forward some of these initiatives, but kind of meeting and collaborating with all of the directors of those divisions that have direct control over sort of those emissions heavy pieces and make these goals their goals, so that as facilities or dining or transportation, fleet management, whatever division it might be that's related in your organization, have their own goals that they have to report on. And through that, take ownership and pride and excitement about moving these things forward, so that I really see it as a time to to expand the team. So it's not a niche. It's not an office anymore. It's just part of operations.
That's a great point. I like that. Thank you. And Adam, I'll give you the last word on this part.
Here's my not very bold prediction for number 2. The SEC finalizes its draft rule on ESG reporting, and that kicks off a mad scramble for every publicly traded company to gather and calculate and be able to report their scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions.
And do you want a prediction on how many nervous breakdowns will happen when that occurs?
My
Are
prediction
people
is
ready for that?
are going to be, sorry?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish that.
I said my biggest prediction is that the biggest winner in the SEC rule-making process is going to be the verification, the audit companies.
Because everybody's going to be knocking on their doors. That's for sure. Okay, very good point. Well, I thank you all for, we're not done with you yet, but I want to thank you all for sharing your opinions and experiences. I love it when the data is brought to life, and that's really what we were able to do today. So thank you, Jane and Heath and Adam, for that. But we're not done with you yet, because we have a lot of questions coming in from our audience, and I want to give some time to be able to go through those. So everybody take a drink of water, take a breath. And here we go with our first question. And again, just jump in. Whoever wants to answer, just jump in. The first question, what advice would you give to someone that is new to their role in driving sustainability initiatives? Who wants to talk to the newbies in the crowd? Adam?
Yeah, I think Jane said it before. There's low-hanging fruit out there. So notch an early win. Find the one thing that has a really quick payback or is an obvious alignment between sustainability and, say, operating expenses or something like that. And use that win, that success, to demonstrate that sustainability isn't a losing proposition, whether it's in expenses or in stakeholder satisfaction, and then buy yourself more time to do the next thing. Leave the harder stuff for a little while later till everyone's on your side and you're fully integrated across the whole company. You can't measure your budget anymore.
And I would add, spend the time to collaborate with the other people who need to be involved. Like, don't bring a project, for example, to the HVAC group and say, we need to do this. Get their buy-in, get their advice on what they'd like to see happen, and then share the credit. Even maybe more than you feel like you need to at the end, because the more people can be involved in the win, the more they will want to keep winning.
Yeah, I would echo that. What this immediately makes me think of is servant leadership. You know, there probably were things happening before you joined that organization. There were probably successes. There were probably losses. Digging into a little bit, some of that history, understand where people are coming from, why there were wins or why there were successes. I think that would be a really great thing, just to build that relationship with the others that probably had some involvement, even if they weren't directly sustainability professionals within the organization. There was probably involvement across the organization in some way, and understanding that background and history, I think, is important.
Great. Okay, thank you. And we'll go on to our next question. Who would you say are the top firms in the U.S. that help companies achieve their sustainability goals? Where do you go for help? Where do you go to get this done?
Obviously, you go to Heath Blount.
I'm not going to answer that question.
We'll put his home phone number in the chat so everybody has it. But where do you start? Anybody?
Well, I'll jump in and just say on the higher ed side, and then I'll turn it over to Adam, that there are nonprofit organizations. I've mentioned them already, but ASHI and Second Nature are great places to start to get connected with networks of other people and a lot of really great resources. But they're also great places to find out what companies are looking to support this space. So if you go to their conferences and their webinars and you see who's sponsoring them, and obviously we have sponsors on this webinar today, that is a good way of kind of getting a general overview of who wants to work with you in these areas. And from there, you can develop a list that you can kind of start to go through and check who their other clients are and maybe contact them directly about their experiences.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that market research is definitely a great place to start. What are your peers doing? What might that indicate about what you should or could be doing? What types of partnerships are out there based on your industry? I think that would also be a good place to start.
Yeah, I'd say there's a bunch of different ways to go about it. There's the relatively cost-conscious way, which is to, as both Heath and Jane indicated, see what your peers are doing, join industry consortia. There's here in Atlanta, I have a local group of sustainability folks that I network with constantly. I also learned a lot from CDP and reading their guidance and being on their webinars, and some of the other ESG ratings orgs offer similar things like that. Then, of course, there are boutique firms like Heath's that are experts in this field and are happy to consult with you. And I think the last of the three ways I think about, the most expensive, but sometimes the one you need, I was joking about the accounting advisory firms. They're all doing ESG advisory now. Deloitte is hiring hundreds of thousands of newly minted sustainability folks to consult for you. They're expensive. But sometimes the naysayer in your organization needs to hear the thing that you want to say to them from someone with a Deloitte email address. I have found that when Deloitte or Goldman Sachs or McKinsey says it, it's listened to in a way that when I said it, it wasn't. And it's a bummer, but I think Jane said this: share the credit, take the win, move on.
Good advice. And I'll put a little shameless plug in here. Webinars like this and companies like Acuity and Atrius are there to help and answer some questions and provide services as well. So keep those in mind. Okay, and we're almost out of time. Let's see if we can get a few questions in here. What is the greatest challenge? What's the one biggest challenge you've had to overcome naysayers? And I'm going to guess that's naysayers within your company or outside of your company in terms of doing what you need to do to meet, get your data in order to meet your goals.
Well, I just gave you my answer. It was Goldman Sachs.
Okay. Anything else? Any other challenges?
I think I'll say that in my work, especially early on, there were a lot of people who just thought things wouldn't work, who had an experience 5 years or 10 years ago that said, we tried that and it didn't work. And often for really valid reasons. And as Heath said, it's hugely important to understand why they feel that way and what happened. And so listen and be respectful of those experiences. And then also to always say, I get it, but could we try again? And we'll try it and we'll measure it and we'll see what happens and then we'll try again. I think for my institution, which is a really old, established place, a lot of our employees have been here for over 30 years. The key to overcoming obstacles, whether they were cultural or operational or tradition or whatever, was to just say, to be kind and open and say, could we try it? And demonstrate results along the way. Take it bit by bit. And the more you can show that something can have a positive impact and the sky isn't going to fall if you turn the air conditioning off at 6 p.m. every night, you just maybe have to take it one step at a time. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges is it can be a slog. You have to be patient and you have to be willing to keep coming back with the next step. But it's definitely worth doing.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And I'm going to sneak in one last question because we're almost out of time. And this one, I like this one. What one piece of advice or action should our audience consider after hearing all this presentation, all this information that they had? And remember, we've got people listening at all levels, from those just starting out to those who are ahead of the curve, so to speak. So what's the one thing they should do after this webinar?
Well, if you're part of that chunk of respondents that is still using manual tracking and spreadsheets to get their data, get a tool. You need to spend your time on the analysis and the action. Let the bots do the collection and the calculations.
Yeah, I'd sort of tangential to that. I would say, understand what your material impacts are. Where are your areas of greatest concern? And so what is the best place to focus your attention.
Yeah, I'm basically going to echo that, but maybe frame it a little differently, and encourage everyone to take a moment and think really big. Think about your biggest institutional goals and the most exciting thing you think you could move forward, and feel inspired by that, feel empowered by that, and then think about what is a specific, reasonable, actionable thing you can do that will feed that. And think about framing it in those terms. I think in sustainability, sometimes we get a little caught up in feeling small, and we suggest a recycling program or a paper reduction program, and those are important, but they're much more impactful and more exciting for everybody if they're tied to the really big stuff, because that is ultimately what we're working on, is the really big stuff that could not be more important. So let's act like it.
Jane, I couldn't think of a better note to end on. We are at the top of the hour, out of time. We didn't plan that, but that was a great note. Let me thank you, Jane, Heath, Adam, so much for your time and your expertise today. It's really appreciated. And thanks to Atrius for putting the webinar together for us and for this research that is available. Don't forget to click on that resource box and take some time, look through these results. I think you'll find them helpful. And finally, thanks to our audience today for joining us. We really appreciate your time and hope you'll be back with us for our next webinar. But for now, thanks again and have a great day.